president of the IAB, and actually the gentleman who grew up in the same hometown as me, Mr. Randall Rothenberg. Thank you for taking the time.
I would do this for anyone from Fairlawn, New Jersey.
We're making a lot of predictions about the future and what's going to change the most in 2010. So what do you think, and I don't want, maybe you don't have to make any predictions, you can if you'd like, but what do you think are the biggest changes that you're going to see in the industry this year?
We seem to be now on the doorstep of an economic recovery. So 2009, pretty awful year, end of 2008, terrible. We are certainly hearing from virtually all of our members that business is significantly up, the mood is much better. There's obviously been a share shift to digital over the course of 2009, so with a recovery, I think the most fundamental change we're going to see in 2010 is just a lot more seriousness with which marketers and agencies are taking digital. I've been saying, people have been hearing this, that we are on the verge of being the new mainstream, and I think 2010 is the year that that'll become a pretty serious reality for the entire industry. If I were to highlight anything else, there are two things that I've been saying actually for quite a while. That two of the most important growth areas for the entire interactive industry actually sit at almost diametrically opposite ends of the marketing spectrum. You know, one of them, mobile, kind of obvious, the acquisition by Google of AdMob, by Apple of Quattro, the introduction of the iPad by Apple, kind of really began to focus people on this. But what I'm most interested in is what we're now seeing in the marketplace, which is that mobile devices are being viewed by marketers as the bridge between brand advertising budgets and consumer advertising budgets. Frank Cooper, the Pepsi CMO, talked about this in his keynote speech this morning. So that's one. But at the other end of the spectrum, and I think we saw it here again today too, it's good old-fashioned television and the reinvention of the television screen as a fully interactive HD device. And that's going to make brand advertising flow like nobody's business into interactive media. Avner Ronen talked a fair amount about that, as did some others. So those are the things I'm looking for in 2010.
So with that said, I would tend to agree. Last year, there was a lot more fear in the room, I believe. I believe that a lot of people were worried about premium content, premium publishers, and I think this year there was some fear, but I think there was a lot more positive talk about how to make the industry better and specific changes, how to use data better, how to help the advertiser better, advertiser needs better. So would you agree with that? Do you think that's a theme that we're building on, to more customized solutions for advertisers and publishers? Well,
yeah, but I also think that a lot of companies and a lot of executives are adapting to an obvious reality. I mean, the internet, what we've been calling the internet, is a disruptive technology that's now been around fundamentally in the advertising space for 14 years. Right. So after 14 years, you've got to get accustomed to what the disruption means. Tolman Jeffs, one of the speakers today from Jordan Edmiston Group, I think spoke very eloquently about something that many of our members have learned to accept, that there is an imbalance between supply and demand that is putting pressure on classic CPM pricing for classic forms of display advertising, and so business models have to change and adapt. I think that we've seen some very interesting adaptations just in 1 year. So a year ago, when Bob Carrigan, the CEO of IDG, spoke to the members about integrating marketing services models into their businesses, I think that was controversial to a lot of publishers. This year, when Jack Griffin and Martin Reedy of Meredith spoke about the same subject in very clinical detail, I think A, it was less controversial, and B, you saw a lot of companies out there taking notes about how they were going to do that themselves. So I think maybe the biggest change here is that companies are saying, I can either make technology my friend or it will be my enemy, so I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to be the disruptor now.
Another big theme of this year's IAB, and it wasn't so much of the content, but a lot of the work the IAB this year was around self-regulation.
Yes.
So we announced 2 self-regulation pieces this weekend specifically. So how do you feel in general how the market is accepting the self-regulation concept? I know there's some worry and uncertainty that they're going to want us to go a little farther, but what's your general feeling about the concept of self-regulation?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, it's been a sea change since we first began talking about the importance of public policy, the importance of introducing self-regulation into our industry. So 3 years ago, after I came in, we began discussing this. I think that was a bit of a question mark to most of the industry. They didn't understand it. They were ignoring it. Now it's very much a part of our public dialogue, the public importance of what IAB does. So I think that's been great. We've gotten, as I announced on last night, we've gotten a really enormous amount of support for things like our Privacy Matters pro bono advertising campaign. We've got more than 600 million impressions that have been donated to it so far, more than $400,000. At the same time, I keep saying it is very, very important that every company in the media and advertising and marketing industry, I'm not just talking interactive, I'm talking every company in the marketing media ecosystem has to understand, number one, the threat of really bad regulation by regulators or politicians who don't understand our business and aren't necessarily willing to learn. That's A. And B, the importance of participating in very strong, very aggressive, independently enforced self-regulation. You gotta love your consumers, you gotta love them, and you've got to be able to prove to them that you love them by participating in a system that shows you are worthy of their trust. And this is really an essential part of it. I mean, there's nothing that I think is more important. There's no message that I deliver or that we deliver as IAB that's more important than that. I have a lot more confidence today than I did in 2007 that industry would rise to that occasion. But I just want to make sure that every company in our membership really not just groks to it, but embraces it.
Right. So I'm going to ask you to make a public policy prediction. Do you think, specifically on the data question, do you think that public policy is going to go too far and we're going to have to unwind, or do you think at the 11th hour we're going to get to a business-friendly or relatively business-friendly decision that we can live with?
I don't think it's going to be 11th hour. I mean, certainly we've been having an ongoing, very real, very public, very open dialogue with the Federal Trade Commission. We've been engaged in lots of back and forth with members of Congress. And look, there's not going to be any value to any political leader or any regulator to break the internet. They know that. I think some of them are becoming aware now that they know what they don't know, so they don't want to take those steps. They're really willing, interested in learning from us. At the same time, they do want to pass bills, they do want to pass regulations. I mean, that is what legislators and regulators do. It's kind of like we're in the business of selling advertising, they're in the business of regulating and legislating. So it's very important that if something like that is going to happen, that we kind of continually dialogue with them to make sure that whatever is done is beneficial both to consumers and to businesses. I'm pretty confident that we're going to end up with regulation and or self-regulation that facilitates really the growth of consumer trust and the growth of businesses, consumer-oriented businesses that need that trust in order to grow.
I'm happy to hear that you're optimistic, and CPX as a company will support the IAB and that move whichever we can, because we believe that educating the market is a solution. I think there's probably plenty of people who don't really understand the issue, and that's probably why, as what we think, that's probably why you hear this wild swings in the conversation. It's just a lack of education.
Well, as you know, Rob, because we've talked about it before, one of the things that actually drives me a little bit crazy personally is there is quite a lot of intentional fear-mongering taking place in Washington by groups that are anti-advertising and even more fundamentally anti-business and anti-growing economy. So they take phrases like data and consumer data and they kind of construe it and inflame it as if there is something to be worried about there. Well, consumer data has existed for well more than 100 years, ever since Sears began mailing catalogs to people. Consumer data, not individual data, not personal data, but consumer data is what's used to deliver the internet. IP addresses, if you don't have an IP address somewhere embedded in the client-server technology system, a company can't get its web page to you. So the notion that you start regulating IP addresses because there's something to fear, well, okay, fine, but that means you're not going to get the internet. Not that you're not going to get your customized homepage, you're not going to get the internet. Or if we start going in the direction that the European Union is threatening to go in, which is put all cookies under a strict regulatory regime, well, that also means you're not going to get your internet, because if that happens, your personalized homepage, your personalized daily newspaper homepage, they don't come through. The other thing that people need to understand is that unless you can use these very benign technologies, these markers called cookies, you're going to be overwhelmed with advertising. I mean, you think that you were getting spammed before, wait till you see what it looks like when cookies are banned. It's going to be the Spam Reinvention Act of 2010 or 2011. And I think that's where we've got to get a lot better at just explaining the basic business operations and technological underpinnings of the interactive business. The things that you should be worried about are things that you should be worried about. It's companies losing hard drives, companies losing data. It's about malware providers and spyware providers. There is a lot of bad stuff that can happen, as can happen in any kind of public environment like a city. But fundamentally, the technology underpinning the internet is what allows consumer value and user value to happen, and that's what we've got to start explaining to people.
I share your optimism, and I look forward to how this is going to play out, and we'll participate as much as we can. Last night's comments from Dave Moore have drawn a lot of attention from the press, yes. Positive, and we're very happy for the press. One of his comments was specifically made a prediction about that we should be, that premium content needs to potentially go behind a paywall or some sort of paywall to help support that business. Drawn a lot of interest. What is your position on it?
Well, I've always been a kind of a flaming moderate on this, and I've always believed that this really stark opposition that a lot of digerati have kind of promoted, that it's got to be free, and then some people on the other side say, no, it's got to be paid, has been a very silly and useless distinction. Obviously, interactive media will be both free and paid. There are 1,000 variations on this theme. In fact, one of the most beneficial conversations I think took place today on the first day of the IAB meeting was there was a lot of discussion about hybrid models. Gordon MacLeod from the Wall Street Journal talked about the importance of hybrid free paid models for them. Avner Ronen from Boxy talked about the freemium model. So I think the industry is now getting much more sophisticated about the various ways you can use both free and paid to drive positive user experiences and positive business results. So I think, it's always seemed clear to me that that's really what the industry was going to be composed of.
I haven't spent a lot of time at the IAB. We've been involved for about the last year and a half. And I would say, as a microcosm of the industry in general, it's a good group because there's a lot of companies, co-opetition is a common theme, and I think ultimately people are trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make the industry better. Yep. So I would thank you. I think your leadership brings that, and thank you for that. I think that the industry is becoming a better place because we're all involved and because you're involved, and thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for putting on a great event.
Oh, well, obviously, thank you for that too. But I mean, the reality of the story, and I know it sounds like BS to people, but we literally can't do it without our members. So all the work that we do is not just for the members, but driven by the members. The standards and guidelines that we achieve consensus around are done in committees that involve dozens, in some cases scores, of member company executives coming together to agree on things that they otherwise would be competing about. I mean, the terms and conditions that the standard contract between agencies and publishers had more than 100 people from agencies and publishing companies participating in those meetings and task forces to drive it to conclusion. So, I mean, basically all the IAB is 29 people who act as a consensus hub for the industry to bring people into a room and then basically keep them locked inside until they reach agreement. The conferences are one of the things we do to really try and get the dialogue going that lets people understand where IAB and where the industry needs to head, so we make sure that our agenda is the right agenda for the coming year.
Thanks again.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. We really appreciated this.